Hello, everyone. This is Defense Politics Asia, and welcome to a new series of DPA panel. And this time around, we'll be talking about democracy. What is democracy? So anyway, I'll hand over to Toby, which is the organizer for this panel, and he will explain more about what is this panel about. Toby.
Hi, everyone. Democracy is a widely used word. It means many different things to many people. It can mean representative democracy, where people vote for other people to represent them. It can mean direct democracy, where people vote directly on laws, choosing yes or no for any specific law. It can mean that only certain classes of people can vote, while others remain effectively slaves or some other underclass, such as immigrants. In the modern world, every war is justified as a struggle for democracy, and every government claims to enshrine this sacred ideal of democracy within its fabric. North Korea claims to be a democracy. East Germany claimed to be a democracy when it existed. Communist China claims democratic principles as its own, and even the United Kingdom, a monarchy with a House of Lords chosen by bloodline, claims to have invented the very ideal of democracy. The origins of the term itself are no less strange. The Athenians in ancient Greece kept slaves and did not extend the voting rights to all members of society. Only men could vote. Moving forward through history, the idea that powerful elites would choose their king or that property ownership conferred voting rights was considered a major leap forward in social evolution towards democracy. So if there's one thing we can all agree on about democracy, it is that nobody really agrees about anything. Everybody exalts the idea of democracy, but everybody has their own idea about what it means and ought to mean. At the heart of the concept, though, is the notion of what is called Vox Populi, Vox Dei in the Latin, which means the voice of the people is the voice of God. That is to say, everybody, even atheists, appear to agree that the general will of the people is something sacred, something inherently important. Very few people argue openly against democracy. Presumably, this is because it is unwise to declare that other people are subhuman, inherently less valuable than oneself. That path leads inexorably to conflict, as people do not like to be treated as inferior, as mere property to be traded and disposed of by self-appointed elites. At the heart of the notion of representation, as opposed to direct voting on laws, has been the idea that elites have better access to education and information, and this allows them to make better decisions than common people, who were traditionally illiterate and uninformed. In the pre-industrial era, such a case carried a lot of weight. In the modern age of internet and nearly universal literacy, combined with extensive leisure time for self-education, the notion of elite representation is questionable and perhaps even faintly ridiculous. To be elite in the modern world arguably means to be wealthy and not much else. As such, systems of representation appear to be evolving into an orchestrated drama where elites, through corporations, sponsor all the participants in the systems of democracy. The people are then invited to vote for representatives who already serve other masters, and they have nearly identical policies on offer. The corporations then use power to protect and enhance the wealth that they gather through the political system. So in this panel, I'll be asking a series of questions, and then each person in the panel can answer in turn.
So hi, I'm from California. In the United States, we call it a constitutional republic, but we choose our senators and representatives democratically through a vote. And when it comes to federal, it's a little bit different. It's really run by the states, and the states then pick electors that they send to that decide the president. So it's a little strange, but that's our system.
Yeah, I think so in Singapore it's a bit we follow the British system. So that I think they call it the Westminster system, where you have you basically vote in parties, and then by standard democracy, first past the post, 50, the one that will get the most vote will get elected as a member of parliament or representative. In maybe some other countries they call it representative, and then they will represent the people's voice in the parliament, and the party with the most members will form the government, and they will get to choose to be the ministers or whatever. Then the leader of the party will become the prime minister, and because the system is as such, means that the leader can be like the prime minister, which is the most powerful person in the government, can be indefinitely be the leader of the country. So that differs from United States, where the president have only 2 terms, which is basically 8 years. But a prime minister can effectively become like the leader for infinity until the person die. So that's the difference, which is also why we have Lee Kuan Yew, who is being said as to be a dictator in an authoritarian state, because he was the prime minister for like forever until he stepped down for the next prime minister because of leadership renewal. And then because it was a one majority party, his party wins all the seats for most of the time. Not all the time, but most of the time they win all the seats. And so people get confused, whether is this democracy because there is no opposition. But the thing is that it is also democracy because it's elected. It's just that there is just no credible opposition to be voted in. So we still have the same problem today. We have more oppositions today, but they are still shit. So the most likely the ruling party is still going to dominate for a bit of time to come. Toby.
So in Australia, we have the Westminster system with variations. It's unusual here that it is compulsory to vote in the elections. You have no liberty to not take part. And there are arguments for and against that. The system is broken down into 2 levels of government. So you have a House of Representatives, and they make laws, they make new laws. But you also have a Senate, an upper house above this. And this Senate, you don't vote for the people, you vote for parties. And then inside the party, they decide which senators they will have. So this is a strange system. In the UK, the Senate system is the House of Lords, and those people actually inherit their seat by bloodline. Which is a funny kind of democracy. But the thing about the Senate is the Senate has a lot of power. The Senate can veto legislation. It can recommend changes to legislation. So it's what we call a check and a balance, so that if the House of Representatives were to do something too radical, according to the people who own and run the political parties, they have a means of stopping anything too radical from happening. And again, there are arguments for and against whether or not that is a good thing. In a way, it means that the system is ultimately controlled. But in another way, it means that it's not dangerous. There's a widespread belief that democracy can turn into the rule of the mob, and that 51% of the people can decide to commit genocide against the other 49%. And so if you have an upper house and a Senate, they can control this kind of excess if it should happen. Again, we call this a system of checks and balances. How well that works is up for debate, but it's very much a system of representation. So you vote for other people to vote for you on laws. You don't vote directly. But having said that, we also have referenda. We also have very occasionally, we have occasions where everybody votes yes or no on a proposal. Right now, we have a proposal being put forward to grant what is called the voice for the Aboriginal people. And nobody's really sure what that means exactly. And this is one of the problems with referenda is, who gets to decide how often these issues come up and what the issues are. We have a guest coming on later from Switzerland, Tim, who can speak more about that in Switzerland. They have a more advanced system of referenda. But so there is that aspect of direct democracy in Australia as well, but I wouldn't suggest that it's widespread or dominant. So
in Singapore is
representation.
in Singapore it's similar. Because maybe we are of former colonies of the British Empire. The election is also by law. It's permanent. It's compulsory to vote, because if you don't vote, you will lose your place in the voting list. That means you don't get to vote unless you re-register yourself. So if you miss your election for no reason, then you have to re-register yourself to put yourself back into the voting list. But you will not be permanently banned from voting. So that's, have to put it that way. But so it's different from United States, because United States thinks that you since you have a total freedom to total liberty, you can also choose not to vote, and which is actually, I feel that it messes up the election, because because I believe in the fact that there is actually a silent majority, and if you allow the silent majority to not vote, then they will just not vote, because they are the silent majority. So that actually screws things up. Yeah, I feel that if had there was no compulsory voting, our ruling party would not have such a reign of power, because the normal people would want to vote for stability, and so that's what it is. And it's interesting also to talk about the Senate, because I think it's either in the earlier days, or it was in the late days of Lee Kuan Yew's prime ministership. We were actually trying to think about the days after the ruling party fails to have such power, such to have a majority. They were worried that maybe there will be a populist opposition, or destructive opposition that will destroy Singapore, and they were contemplating whether there should be a Senate, or or any other form of check and balances. And in the end, the solution was not to have a Senate at all. Like, because the debate was between, what's the point of you vote in representative to help you to make the divisions, then you create another system just to block them from working. It creates unnecessary inefficiencies, because you could have just vote them out the next election. So that is the kind of debate. Then so what we have in the end is, we used to have a selected presidency. So the president was just supposed to be a head of state. They are just the face of the country. They're just there to look like a king, or like an honorable person to represent the country. They have no executive power. They cannot make laws and anything. So and then the Lee Kuan Yew, during his ending terms, he decided that they debated and decided to make it an elected president. And then this president will have expanded power. They will carry the second key to the reserves. And then his job is basically to protect the reserves. Because Singapore have a lot of money, a lot of money being invested everywhere. There's a lot of reserve. So, but then it's also a state secret. So nobody's supposed to know how much reserve we have. So, but we need someone to take care of it, and then to prevent future governments from abusing our savings. So they decided that to give the president the second key. So the parliament have one key, the president have another key. So the president don't agree, then the government will not be able to access the reserve. So we only have ever spent the reserve twice, and the last time was actually during COVID. But the thing is that in the end, after we have the president, the first elected president, who was actually from the ruling party, went rogue, basic in the sense that he started to do his job. He basically asked the government, okay, so how much reserve do we have? Where's the ledger? And then the government was like shocked. He's asking for the ledger. It's like, what? Then after that, they spent like 3 years, 4 years, until almost the end of his term, to able to come up with the full accountability of all the reserves. And because there was actually no job description to what the president should do, so the description was purely protect the reserves. So his thought was that, since I have to protect the reserves, so what is the reserves? That caused a lot of problems, and actually that caused a conflict between the president and the ruling party, and that actually puts into yet another question about the efficiency problem, because now they created a problem for themselves. Now they have a check and balance that actually make their work harder. So So this is a interesting conundrum that we are facing in Singapore, and actually we are going to have our next presidential election soon. So again, we have a ruling party candidate that just quit the party to join the election, which is supported by the party, and then for me, my question will always be, what's the point? So you already have your own candidate. If I vote you in, vote the ruling party member in, then there is no check and balances. But yet, do you really want a check and balance? Because that will actually, if this person become very rebellious, he purposely just want to say no for the sake of saying no, want to combat against the ruling party, then we're going to get stuck. For example, if we really need to use the reserve like for something urgent, and then this president just went opposition style, just oppose for the sake of opposing, then we're going to have a problem. So this is the debate we have in Singapore, and I thought that it's just silly to have an elected presidency, because in the end, the government is doing whatever they could to make sure that their own candidate will get elected. Like that happened in the previous election. They suddenly just came up with new rules. Oh, no Chinese can run for the election because we need to make sure that there's equal representation for all the race. They just came up with a new rule because they have the supermajority. They can change the constitution anytime they want. So what check and balances is just nonsensical to us. Yeah, but that's Singapore for you. Immanuel is back with seemingly better internet.
Yeah, it seems my system or laptop was the issue, so I decided to go back to using my phone. So there was an adjustment I made the last open mic, so I was surprised it wasn't working on the system. But now it's okay.
Oh, do you want to explain about Nigeria? Nigeria's election system.
Okay. We have an election. We have an election every 4 years. So we practically we just follow everything the US does. But initially it wasn't like that. When we got independence, we had a system similar to the British, where we elect MPs and all those. Then the majority gets the to be the prime minister. So that was what we had, and then we had a ceremonial president then. So, but after the first military coup, suspended that. They made everything centralized, and so the next time we were transformed to a republic, we decided to adopt the American system, which is we have a president, we vote for a president, and then we vote for House of Representatives, we vote for senators. So from each state, we have 3 senators from each state. Then, but the House, but in terms of House of Representatives, we have more based on the population. So based on population of the states, and this is so the House of Representatives is more representative than the Senate. Why the Senate, there are some states with larger population and larger landmass. All 3 states. There are some states with smaller population, smaller landmass. They still give 3 senators. So that's how we do it. And then we vote for the senators every 4 years. We vote for the president every 4 years. Then also in terms of the state level, the same thing. We vote for governors every 4 years, and we vote for the House of Assembly members in the state now every 4 years. But this time it's only one house. So in the state, the issue now in the state is because of court cases and all that. So most of the states are not conducting election. It's not all the states that conduct election on election years again, because when someone is let's assume the previous governor won fraudulently, and then they took 2 years for the case in court. Whenever this governor takes over, he begins to count his own tenure from that point when he took over his own 4 years. So we have most of the states, and many of the states are not more organized again in terms of election, but the federal level has remained at the same time. Then I think that's basically. Or is there any question that I missed concerning that?
No, you didn't miss much. So which one do you prefer?
Referenda there? Do they have any referendum in Nigeria where everybody votes on the proposal?
No, we have not had any referendum ever. I have not. No, we haven't had any referendum. probably before independence, but I can't remember very well. Before independence, I don't know if there was a referendum then, but we haven't had any referendum. Most of the decisions are taken by the House of Representatives and the Senate. So why they just like the US, the House of Representatives is the lower house, so the Senate has more say over things than the House of Rep. But and also the House, the more or less is also a check and balance for the president. So, but most times, what happens most times, the Senate always has Senate and House of Representatives. Always, the ruling party has both the House of Representative and the Senate, and then also presidency. So usually, it's at the end of the day, it's more or less is rubber stamp Senate House. So, but there was a case where I think 2 elections ago, what happened then was that the guy that won was actually from the ruling party. The ruling party, it just came into power because initially we had the People's Democratic Party (PDP) and the APC. The PDP had ruled for 16 years after handed to civilian rule. So that election, the pendulum shifted to the opposition, which was APC, and this opposition was a coalition of parties, of different opposition parties who came to form one party, and then also some members from the PDP, the camp, to the opposition. So we had a senator who he was from the that's APC for someone else. So he didn't like that. So they conducted election. While the senators in the ruling party were having their meeting, they decided to convert here and some of those loyally election for Senate president. So that was how he took over. Officially was from the ruling party, but most of this thing was against most of what the Senate approved and did that period was against the presidency. So that was the only time we had little check and balance. So apart from that, it's usually just anything the president says, that's what the Senate approves without much checks to what the president is doing. So, and then there are many times also the president takes decisions even without the Senate, without the legislative arm approving it, despite the constitution stipulating that. But here to some extent, the president has a high level of power without checks. Is that?
I think which one do you prefer? Do you prefer the American system or the British system in terms of the do you have like Westminster, prime minister style, or the president one? Which one do you prefer?
Well, if I'm to say, I would have preferred the previous system, but not really because of the aspect of the British system. Like the previous system, we had 3 regions then, where we talk about the premiers of those regions. They had power. Those premiers had power almost equivalent to the president. So then the prime minister, but prime minister was just mainly for external affairs. So they were the ones in charge of their own region. Then we had just 3 premiers. So those premiers had power to take this. But since when it came into president, where everything is centralized, things have been complicated and a lot of things are not, bureaucracy and all that don't allow a lot of things to work. Why any region that wants to make an impact, any premier that impact, he has liberty to make an impact because he's in control of everything in his region. But now the governors are not in control. Everything is centralized. So they go, and it was the military that caused this. So right from military times, even when they handed back to civilian, officially we are a federative system, but that doesn't is decentralized. So that's the only reason I would prefer the previous system of government to one.
Hi, Tim, the upgrade from Switzerland. Welcome to the panel. So we're talking about what democracy is like where we live. So I'm glad you have shown up because Switzerland has a very interesting system of democracy. We've been talking about systems of representation and the occasional referenda. Can you talk a bit about how the Swiss system works and how they mix together representation and referendum?
So basically, we have a direct democracy, right? It's one special feature of the Swiss political system. It's very special. It allows the electorate to express the opinion on decision taken by the Swiss government, or the Swiss parliament, better said. We propose amendments to the federal, because I need to remember everything right now. It's a long time I didn't go through it again. It's nice to go through it again because it's a nice system, right? Yeah, exactly. So the electorate express the opinion on decision by the Swiss Parliament, and then propose amendments to the federal constitution, right? So basically, it's like this. I don't know what you want to know.
And
more.
Is voting compulsory in Switzerland?
What do you mean by compulsory?
Do you have to vote if there is a referendum? Do you have to vote, or can you choose not to vote?
No. You're free to. You're free to do as you please. If you not agree or you don't want to vote on this specific topic, then you don't need to. You can, and most of the time, around 40% of the population, Swiss population, who is able to vote, is going and voting and expressing what they want for the country.
But immigrants do not vote, is that right?
Immigrants do not vote until a certain period. So they have like periods from before you get a certain right, especially the right to vote. You need to be in Switzerland, know the language, work, and so on. So you can express also your opinion in the bright society, right? Because it's we do it like this. If you want to be a part of Switzerland, you also need to be in the system. So you need to also represent your values afterwards when you when able to prove to the Swiss government that you also are part of it, right?
And how many times would the Swiss vote in a referenda each year?
4 times. Yeah.
And who chooses the subject for each referenda?
So this is it depends. It depends. There is a popular initiative, optional referendum. We have a lot of and the mandatory referendum. So it depends on which part, right?
So how does the
political parties
initiative work?
Pardon?
Or how does the popular initiative work?
So the popular initiative it allows citizens to propose an amendment or to, yeah, exactly, and on specific issues or political things, yeah. And you need to have, I think, around 100,000 votes at least, so you can pass the popular initiative. And this goes on for 18 months, so you have 18 months time to actually get this 100,000 votes, and then afterwards you get a response. Or most of the time, the government, if they see that this happens, they make a counter proposition to the popular initiative. So if somebody says, I want to do this and this and that, and the government most of the time they say, hey, maybe you can do this. This would be our opinion on this case, right? And then you can decide, do you want to go with the people or do you want to go with the government's opposition? Yeah.
So basically, anyone in Switzerland can start a petition and to go and get the signatures they need, the 100,000 or whatever. and then the government has to raise this issue.
It has to raise it. Of course, it not always it does, right? But most of the time it comes up with a counter proposition because they want to bring their agenda through, right? So they propose a reasonable counter argument or counter proposition to what the people want, right? So they can decide by themselves, hey, is it more logical to go with the path of the people, or is it more logical to go the path what the government is implementing or trying to implement? Then it's up
So
to
they
the
still
people.
have. So there are still representatives in Switzerland. So you still vote for representatives in the government to work in the government to decide for
Yes.
budget issues and things like this.
Yes,
So
of
it's
course,
both
we have
systems at once.
exactly. It's a combination. It's a combination. So there's not just only the people on each topic and say, oh, we want to have greener grass on this particular place in Switzerland. Now we need to do X, Y, and Z. No, there is politicians who are have specific duties, right? We have Bundesrat, and we have 7 people who are in this Bundesrat. They're like each individual is like a minister, maybe in other countries, right? Is responsible for economic issue. COVID pandemic, we had the health person who was responsible for the country, not responsible entirely, but he took the decision, right? He said, he went in front of the TV and he said, listen, X, Y, and Z is happening. We will do X, Y, and Z. And most of the time it was pretty logical and explained in a rational way. So people understand what the government is actually doing. Not like in other countries, neighboring countries, like we had in Germany and in France, who just it was from top down, and it was like, oh, okay, it's just gonna be like this, even if it makes no sense. We're just gonna do like this.
Interesting.
Hmm.
So do you guys have political parties?
In Switzerland?
Yes.
Yes, we do. Yes, of course. There's
Oh.
the left, right, middle, green. We have a lot of parties. We have a communist in Switzerland. We have Communist Party in Switzerland. Imagine that. But we have it because the most important part about democracy, I think maybe is already been said, is the freedom, right? The people have and is allowed to show, because if you just have like in a couple of system like 2 parties, it's very difficult to make a choice because you're like a little bit in a in a problem, right? Because either is this one or that one. But in Switzerland, it's quite interesting. You can be somebody who loves environment and goes with the green energy agenda, and we have parties like this, and they are represented also quite well. But they are not totally nuts, you know. They make pretty much sense, you know. Like I said in the previous open mics, listen, if we have this amount of electricity and we take away all our nuclear power plants, then let's make sure that we have a backup and we have enough electricity for everyone, because it's important for the most poorest one, and so on and so forth. So, and the left is the same, the right is the same, and depends on the issues what they want to talk about, right? And they can also raise topics for the general public. So in case they want to make a referendum, the party can decide to make a referendum, right, to get all the votes. There's 10,000, 100,000 people to sign on in 18 months, and then they can go in front of the government and say, listen, we want to have stricter, like, let's say, immigration laws, or we want to have a better health system, or we want to have minimum 25 Swiss franc an hour for each worker, and so on. Then you can decide, does it make sense? And the government sends to every voting person in Switzerland the proposition. It's showcased clearly written down what is the proposition from the party, and then afterwards the government on the other side shows what they think it's correct, and then you can decide. It's like the pro and contra argument, right? And then after, it's up to the voter, right? That's a very good system. So you can decide for yourself, oh, for me this makes sense, so I will vote against. Or this will make sense for me, I will vote for it.
So in this way, the parties themselves make use of the direct democracy. It's not so much two different systems. The parties will use the referenda to pursue their agenda. That's interesting. So, Doug, I think there is also some direct democracy in California, is there not? Can you talk about how
we have a referendum system. So it's not 4 times a year, but it's the same as Switzerland. It sounds like, where if someone comes up with something that they feel like needs to be done at the state level, you put a petition out. There's a legal way to do it, and you can do that for laws, and we can also do it to recall our governor. If we don't think he's doing a good job, we can have a referendum to recall the leadership, and it's been done before. I actually, when Arnold Schwarzenegger became the governor of California, that was the system they used to get Gray Davis out of office. There was a big energy crisis at the time. Everyone's energy bill went through the roof, and we were having rolling blackouts. And someone put together a referendum, and we all voted him out. And then Arnold Schwarzenegger basically said, "I'll fix the energy," and we voted him in.
Did he fix it?
Yeah, he did get that done. And as a governor, I was surprised. I thought it was kind of a joke at the time. It was like, oh my gosh, we elected an actor, but he was pretty efficient as governor, and it worked that time. But we've had other referendum. I think they did referendum on. I think originally they did gay marriage. They might have done marijuana. That was before I got here, but they were able to bring those things up when the legislature wasn't presenting the laws, and just say, oh, we want to do this, and put it in.
And is it like Switzerland? Do the political parties, the Democrats and the Republicans at the state level, do they use this mechanism to put votes to the people? Or is it more like other groups, or citizen groups?
Yeah, it seems to be more of a populist. It came out of the populist movement during the Depression, the progressives. They basically said, look, our politicians aren't doing this for us. So they finally got a state government that put it into the Constitution, where if you get enough people and they vote on it, they can change something, even when the politicians aren't doing what they're supposed to be doing. So normally they're not involved. Sometimes after they see a big groundswell, they'll jump on the bandwagon with the people because they want to be reelected, and they'll start championing it. Sometimes it's an idea that does come from the minority party. They don't have the votes in the House to do it, and then through their grassroots networks, they say, hey guys, if you were to put this to a referendum, we could do this without needing the legislature. So
it's interesting, because we thought that is it going to be only like Switzerland have this kind of system, and then we actually surprised that the state that is going to hell actually have this system as well. Then and it's weird. Like I know that there's a lot of problems, right, with robberies and all sort of weird stuff that's happening in California. Particularly, we are talking about LA, right, or San Francisco. I don't know which one is the one that is going to hell. So how come it didn't work? Isn't the people very angry with the security, the state of the security, the policing, and didn't the people react to it?
It's pretty tough. It's pretty tough to get everyone involved enough to do it. And then a lot of times when you put something up especially that's has to do with crime or whatever, like there's a minority group who might be for it initially to get the votes to just put it on the ballot, but then the larger party comes out and says, oh, this is a terrible law, it's gonna, you know, it's gonna hurt people. And it just seems like unless it's something sort of sensible, like the thing that got Arnold Schwarzenegger in was, like I said, it was blackouts and energy prices, and it was just everyone could agree on it that like this is not sustainable. You know, we don't care who's in charge as long as it's not Gray Davis because he screwed up and we don't have energy. But for some reason, when it comes to the crime laws, you know, people make a little bit of an argument where it's like, well, you know, we should be more compassionate, and you know, next thing you know, we don't have enough votes.
Oh, that's so weird. So that seems like the negative side of referendums, right? That like it seems like it can be manipulated pretty easily, at least for America.
Well, you maybe you get the government you deserve. I was going to ask Tim in Switzerland, like, how often do the people get it right, and how often do they make mistakes with their power of direct democracy?
So, what does it mean, right or wrong? Right? It depends totally on you.
Well, do they regret their decisions? I mean, I remember there was one issue with the gold in Switzerland.
Yeah. I think the results speak for themselves. So that's why I think also we shouldn't impose democracy on other countries or direct democracy or whatever. We should just let the results speak for themselves. And if you see the result for a country who has barely 8 million people, they have so much to show off, right? We have, like you said before, we have a banking system, we have companies who are in the top 10 of the biggest companies in the world. We have a clean environment. Most of the average salary in Switzerland is around $5,000 US, you know. So the many things are pro Switzerland, and that was decided by, most of the time, like I said, around 40% of the population is voting, right? The rest of 60% don't care even to vote because everything is fine, right? the things are going well, right? The people don't need to go and be like, oh, it's horrible, we need to change everything, what's going on? No, in case this happens, the people will, of course, do it. But there is a risk, right? Like Wyatt said, that can be manipulated and on one side or the other. But I think in Switzerland, it's pretty much difficult to do that, because if you bring something to the table and makes 0 sense, then people will see through it pretty quickly. They will say, oh, okay, you just want to do that, and we're not for it. And then we will say no. Or right now is maybe not the time. Maybe like we had also a referendum to join the European Union. And every year it's getting closer and closer to yes. You know, even if the results are horrible for the European Union. And Switzerland made a very good decision to stay a sovereign country and have their own currency. And we're getting pushed by the European Union quite a lot, because they want, of course, the Swiss to be integrated in their system. But Swiss people say, no, we don't want. We want to be independent. We want to have our own choices to make, and have bilateral contracts with the European Union, and that works pretty well with us, right? But let's see, maybe in 100 years, when the new generation is gonna come, and the TikTok generation, they will say, "Oh, European Union, great idea." But
so if Switzerland joined the European Union, would they then lose their power of direct democracy? Would it be almost like a vote to give away their power?
I think so, honestly speaking, because then Brussels will just implement things, and they will say, now you need to have this amount of green energy, and we need to do it, because we're going to have contracts with them. Yeah.
this is exactly what happened to United Kingdom, right? No, this is why they had the Brexit, because there is a lot of the rules and laws that is actually imposed on them from the European side, and then they find it really hard to control, the situation in their country. Or you have even more integrated examples like Greece, which they do not have their own currency, which makes it impossible to actually fix your economy. There's no way you can fix the economy if you cannot control your currency. Like, you cannot make your export cheaper. If you cannot control your currency, you have no power, which means you are just going to be like it's like in the country where you always have poor regions, the suburbs, then the totally rural areas, and then you have the city center. The rural areas will forever be the rural areas, and then until the cities, the which is basically the government, because they are usually in the city and there are most people that are there, decides that no, we want to invest in more street lights and roads in the rural area. Then you get the street lights and roads. There's no way you can grow it on your own because your town over in the rural area have no money. Basically, that's Greece, and then basically there's no way you can do anything about it, because you can't even make your things sell cheaper. So no one
This
has
is a really
incentive to go there.
really interesting subject. This is the difference between centralization and liberty of small independent states. I mean, the United States of America is supposed to be a union of independent states, right? That's kind of the cornerstone of the republic. But we've seen the growth of centralized power over time through the FBI and the CIA. And a lot of it is economic as well. As the federal budget grows, the states become dependent on the spending. And this seems to be similar to the Swiss situation. There's potentially a lot of political will to join the European Union because of the money that would come to those people. And so
Potential
they
money.
may give up their independence in order to integrate and to centralize. And so the question is centralization the enemy of democracy? Does centralization actually destroy liberty? Are big states inherently, I wouldn't say evil, but are big states inherently oppressive because they destroy regional freedoms?
Upgrade wanted to say something, right? I saw your finger.
Yeah, it's pretty funny that you took the example of Greece, who is the birthplace of the democracy, who invented all these things, to talk to each other, right, to get the ideas through, right, and to actually implement them. And now they are where they are. That means that's the best example of history, because you being great once doesn't mean you're going to be great forever, right? That's something also the Americans need to think about, right? The #1 spot is being took by a lot of countries in the world, but to keep it long term, that's the most difficult part, right? And about the Americans, they have actually this check and balances, right? So I wanted to ask Duke, is it that bad? Or because in the news we always hear, oh, there's no democracy is in peril, Donald Trump gonna be president, or Biden's gonna be president, democracy is gonna go to hell. So how is it working also in America?
Well, kind of like Australia, we have the House of Representatives, which, they're only elected for 2 years, and it's done by population. So it's seen as kind of the hot Democratic House, because it's the people that are closest. They're supposed to be closest to the people, and so they're supposed to be representing the passions. And then the Senate was supposed to be, originally it was picked by the states. The state legislatures would pick 2 of their most honorable men to go to Washington, and they would sit in the Senate. Now later we made a constitutional amendment where we could have direct elections to choose those in each state, but still there's this idea, and they have 6-year terms, and they're staggered, so they have a little bit more time. They don't have to worry about the next election, coming up, so they can make decisions that are in the best interest of their state, in their view, and not have to worry about the mob voting them out, And so they used to say it was like a teacup, a hot cup of tea, and the Senate was the saucer that you could hold, you could let it cool down in the Senate. So these hot ideas would come out of the House and go there. But what I'm seeing now is, I think we're kind of having an old fight, which is federalism versus centralization, which is what Toby was saying. A lot of people believe that everything should be the same across the U.S. Whether it's abortion or marijuana, or they just want to make federal laws to cover everyone. But we're such a big nation, people are honestly different in different regions. So the people that live in Alaska are different than the people in New York. And I think it's better if we do the federal system, kind of like your cantons. You can have those regional, you decide for yourselves. But that's the fight right now is, I think a lot of the sort of Donald Trump was a little bit more federal, it kind of push everything down to the states. Like when it came to COVID, he said, look, we're not going to make any federal laws. We're going to put out guidelines and then the states can decide for themselves. And people were saying, why doesn't he come out with a national, lockdown or this or that? And he said, it doesn't work that way. And so that there's a lot of fight just in that. There are some people that think that everything should be the same everywhere you go. And there are others that think states should decide for themselves, like independent. We used to call them the sovereign state of New Jersey or the sovereign state of Virginia. But now we kind of just say, well, we're all in the United States. And why should it be different if I cross the border into Nevada, whether I can get an abortion or buy marijuana or drive
like
this speed limit. Exactly.
Well, the tax rates as well. It's kind of interesting. When I lived in Switzerland, I found it fascinating that each canton had different taxes. And so if you didn't want to pay a lot of tax, you could just like move a couple of hundred meters, because Switzerland's pretty small, and then you could pay much less tax. In Australia, we don't have that. There's no real competition between states. It's all, the state governments have responsibilities, but there's no real difference. There's no competition. And I think in America, there's more competition between states. You see a lot of businesses leaving California to go to Texas and so on. And there's this economic argument that competition produces efficiency. And so you can't tax too much because you'll end up chasing everybody away. We don't have that in Australia, which is something that I lament. It's a pity that, we have a very centralized system. We don't have that economic competition between states to provide the best services for the lowest cost, because that seems to me like, a fundamental of market economics.
I think Immanuel would have experience in this, because they changed, right? You guys changed from where you have the state have more power, then suddenly now all centralized. You want to talk more about it?
So, as I said before, immediately after the independence, we had a system where they had three regions before it came into four regions. But the premier of each region had authority over, like, more or less as was the president of that region. So most of the activity, the revenue generation, all the activities was under his control. There is only a certain percentage that goes to the federal level for the organizing of the federal level. So that time there was a lot of productivity in the economy. For instance, then before there wasn't even oil then, but each region had what they produced to export. Not now that we are an importing state, then we are an exporting state. A lot of agricultural products and the rest were, like, for instance, here in the West, the premier of the West, they had cocoa and the rest. So this cocoa that they use for beverages and the rest, so they were able to export that from the northern region, granite. Then we used to have the granite pyramid, where they use a lot of granite that they make into pyramid before exporting. Then in the East too, they had what they produced. So then also, for instance, in the West, if you come to the West, you still see a lot of people here have a high educational level of or standard or whatever. So then the premier then he invested a lot into education, where it was free education, give you all your books, all your clothing, your uniform, everything, even the hostel, food, everything. So that was part of what brought up a lot of people from here to be, for instance, in the country, a lot of professors and others. So that was stimulating the economy of this region then, while some other regions didn't invest into that until today. If you look at cities here, you look at things in this region, and you go to other regions of the country, you see that they are different. But after the military took over and then centralized everything, when they handed over to civilian rule, it continued as being centralized. For instance, now the crude oil and everything that everyone is relying on now, is all the proceeds go to the federal level. Then from the federal, it is divided according to local government that each state has. So at the end of the day, now most of the governors just sit down, not do implementing any policies to develop the state, not do anything to encourage what the revenue generation in the state. Rather, they just wait every month, go to the to receive money from the federal government. So is that money they use? Those who manage to even pay their workers and the rest pay workers the money they use to those that manage to do any construction. But this time around, they can easily embezzle, and the state suffers. But before, they had to produce something from that state to be able to get revenue to run government of the state. So then it was more productive, even if we look at the economy then compared to now. So that's one thing I think it's better to have a separate region. Then also in 2014, that was two. I've forgotten how they call it now. Confab, that's a confab. I've forgotten the full meaning. But more or less, what they did then was, because since the system wasn't working, so the president then he brought up an idea that we should bring people from all over the countries, religious leaders, traditional leaders, political leaders, civilians. So they went to Abuja this time, not the Senate again, but those people were to meet and have a discussion on how to restructure the country so that it can begin to move forward. So then those are some of the resolutions they came up with to separate power into all the states, that every state is in control of everything it has on the state. So that way now there is less control from outside, where each governor can be pointing hand to other people rather than taking responsibility for what's going on in the state. So those are some of the resolutions that came up. But when the next government came into power, that's the previous president that left, that's when they changed power from PDP to APC, then I said that president wasn't in support of that, because his own region will suffer more for it because of the lack of education and so many of the men that they have not invested into their region. So he dumped it and didn't sign it into law. So those are some of the
so it was not implemented.
It wasn't implemented till today.
Oh my God.
It wasn't implemented, but if it was implemented, and even the president had, the one who conducted this confab, he had the opportunity to do it, but I suspect it was more or less he was using it as a political listen that will vote me in for the next time, and he had almost a year to do it. Rather than doing it, he said, vote me in and I will implement it. Rather, if he was really had good intentions or what to do it, he should have before leaving power, he should have ensured that it was done. But I think even the politicians see this as a better system for them to not be accountable, rather than that system where you are in charge of everything. As a governor, you are more accountable to your people, and they see who to hold, rather than where you hold one person and it tells you it's at the top level that is being controlled. So you can't. There's no one to hold accountable for what is going on. So I think that was why they didn't have any serious intention to sign it into law.
So it proved Toby's point about about the competition is very important, right? And then that the situation happening in United States is actually very dangerous, because the more centralized you are, the more corrupted the situation becomes. Upgrade, you want to say something?
Yeah, there was a very good point from Toby, that competition is very important, and we have this through the cantons, like he said, not just about taxes, but other things too, right? Policy-wise and so on. But now the problem is the European Union comes and says, hey, your canton have get taxed less than our countries. So you need to implement a basic tax for all the cantons, because Zug has maybe 3-4% taxes. So companies went there to just have a seat there and just pay the lowest taxes possible. And they were selling around Europe. And European Union is like, what the hell? They're just there just to pay less taxes. So you need to implement the law. And then that's a little bit the pressure we have, because we are like in the middle of this huge monster of European Union who is eating more and more everywhere. And we're trying to get to still be independent, right? And to have our own future in our own hands. But it gets more and more difficult because the pressure is coming. And the same was with the United States when we had our bank secrets, right? They came in, they said, now you need to give all away and you have no choice. And we, at the beginning, was like, no, you know, it's a secret and it's tradition in Switzerland. And then the FBI came and everything, and then everything went through the roof. And that's why also in Switzerland, if you're an American citizen, you need to, if you want to open a bank account, you need to fill up huge formulas of paperwork, because you're like, screw you, you know, screw you. You want to play with your rules, then we're going to play with our rules with you guys, you know. So just a side effect.
I wouldn't mind. I want to make a point about this. There's a misconception in Western nations that Swiss has banking secrecy laws. They totally do not. The situation comes from the philosopher Rousseau, who distinguished between civil law and martial law. And Rousseau said that in a civil state, the government has civil relations with the people, which means that the government can sue you for money, but they can't send the police around to simply take your stuff or compel you to do things. And so this is where the right to privacy came from in Switzerland. It wasn't a special banking law that gave banks special rights or rich people special rights. It was actually a foundational concept, which is that the government has limited rights in Switzerland. And if they want to pursue you, they pursue you through civil actions in the civil law system. They can't just send the police around. They can't use martial power and force to compel action. And so when foreign governments start to tell Switzerland that it has to compel its people, they misunderstand the situation. They're actually telling the Swiss to devolve away from a civil relationship between government and people and enter into a really degraded form of oppression. So yeah, I find this an unfortunate debate in the West. We don't even understand what a civil relationship is between the government and the people. We still think that a martial relationship is proper, and that in a lot of sense, you know, we are just to be ordered around by our governments. And this is why privacy is largely illusionary. And so is free speech increasingly. Because we still have a martial relationship between our governments and our people, all of our talk about freedoms and rights, it's largely just talk. It's not actually respected by our legal system.
Yeah, and about Rousseau is very funny. He was also a big part in the French Revolution, right? So that's also a very interesting aspect. And also, what is interesting about Switzerland, the direct democracy came because of Napoleon in one sense, right? Because he made he made the first referendum in our country, who is actually pretty insane, right? In that time, in the 1800s. But Toby, I understand your point of view that the government is trying to crack down on the people, right, and impose their will on the people. But let's not forget, democracy was always a process, right, where it's evolving. At the beginning in Greece, the people who had the right to say something were not the poor, the people, the foreigners. Most of the time, it was the rich and the wealthy and the guys who were on the top. And then afterwards, it started to evolve, right? The Roman Empire was the same. At the beginning, it was a very good idea. Everybody's talking, everybody's debating, we get the best solution. And then one guy is coming and takes everything away, right, from you. and so on in the medieval time. So this democracy thing is actually a process over hundreds of years of thousands of hours of debate and finding the best solution for the people. So that's my point about democracy. That it's the best, one of the best systems. It's trying to evolve with time and try to get right what it can. Obviously, there's always going to be a crackdown on the smaller guys. That's how it was born, actually.
I wanted to move the discussion on towards
want
the
to
end.
say something, right?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, before I do.
Oh, I was just going to say, and this goes back to the canton system. Is, you know, I heard people in early founders said that basically they wanted each of our states to be a laboratory of democracy. So each state would do things a little bit differently, and you would see failures, but you would see successes also, and those successes would slowly blossom out. You know, and so anyway, that's all I wanted to throw in.
Totally agree with you, Doug.
Yeah, I think it's important to give the people a chance to learn and improve through their mistakes. And you know, a lot of the arguments against direct democracy is, oh, it'll be terrible. My response to that is, yeah, cool. Let it be terrible and let people learn so that, you know, they get better at it, because this has been the Swiss experience. They haven't always got it right, but every time they get it wrong, they learn and they improve. So in any case, I wanted to move the discussion along, because in the modern world, especially in the West, but this is also pertinent in Africa and in Switzerland, we see people are voting for representatives, and there's very little difference between the policies. Traditionally, we had the left and the right, but these words are becoming meaningless because it's almost a uni party now. Everybody has the same policies, and increasingly these policies provide what's called corporate welfare. Corporations sponsor both political parties, and in return, they get a huge amount of business from the centralized government. And this is one of the dangers of having a highly powerful, highly centralized government, is that large corporations, or the wealthy, if you like, can sponsor it, can actually buy it, if you like. And then they get their return on their investment because the government gives them large contracts. In America, we see it with the military-industrial complex. In Europe, we see it throughout the farming lobbies and other institutions. But essentially, I'm going to throw up this graphic here, you know, which largely encapsulates the idea. So to what extent can we prevent corporations purchasing representatives? Because it seems to me that if someone else is paying your representative, or all the representatives that you get to vote for, they're not really your representative anymore. They've already been bought and paid for. And this seems to be like a really common theme in the West right now. And I wonder if the process of direct democracy might curtail that to some extent, or if this is prevalent in Switzerland as well.
I can share a bit about in Singapore's situation. In Singapore, it's not allowed at all. Like, it's illegal to have lobbying. So there is no such thing as a political party taking money from any corporation. It's actually illegal. And so, of course, without saying, foreign fundings into political parties, or is also illegal. So there is no such thing as lobbying in the monetary sense. So it's very different. So when Singaporeans, when we look at the situation happening in the United States, to us, that's all corruption. There is no other way for us to look at it. It's just corruption, because the moment you have a lobbying where the corporations, or a group of corporations, or a group representing the interest of a group of corporations giving money to a political party so that they can run an election, that's basically corruption in our eyes. So which is why the United States have a lot of broken laws, or broken legislations, or broken action, because once you do that, then they are no longer representing the people. So, and I think that and maybe another reason is because the United States have too long an election cycle. The election cycle is way too long. In Singapore, the election is unpredictable. You have no idea when the election is going to happen. You only know that within a time frame it will happen, because they have to happen every 4 years or every 5 years, depending on the presidency or is the parliament. Parliament is, I think, it's 4 years, every 4 years. So you know the time frame when it would happen, but it's decided by the prime minister. So the ruling party will make their own preparation. They know when it's going to happen, but it's always a secret. So but by the time they announce, the whole election will happen like within a month, and you have like a week or so to do your rallies, and all these rallies are regulated in the sense that you cannot start rallying before that. You have to have police permit and everything. That you have to book the rally grounds, and the rally grounds is already decided, so you have to make your own bookings. So so in the sense that you don't really need to spend extra money, and then televise, like the government will enforce the state TV to have a televised debate or messaging. So everything is provided for in the sense, just that of course you still need to have money in terms of if you want to put banners or billboards or whatever, those small billboards, those you still need to spend your own party's money. But the money, those parties that have no money, they will not put anything. Like some of them, they just run for the sake of running. They know they're going to lose, but that is the system that we have. And because the time period is so short, it doesn't really matter. Like, and it's usually in Singapore, the party is always about do you want to vote the ruling party, or do you want to protest? So you're basically voting a protest vote, or you're voting for the government. So the opposition doesn't really matter. It's all about protesting only. Unless it's the main opposition party, then that kind of like makes a bit of difference, because the main political party, the opposition party, now have a bit more credibility, but they are losing it over these past 4 years. It's like it's going down the drain already due to some scandals. So anyway, yeah, but there are some certain ways, and I always thought about the American system, because I'm always following very closely about the American political system. I feel that maybe elections should be funded by the government. Like everyone have the same platform, the same budget, and then it's paid for, as long as as long as you run, you're giving the same opportunity to voice. So what we're seeing now in the United States is that like people like Bernie Sanders had been pushed out of the window. Now we have the Kennedy, right, also getting pushed out of the window. It's like you never see them on TV. Even Trump is the same thing. So Trump say a lot of ridiculous things so that he can get on TV. And yeah, I mean, that's the way I think is needed. If not, you once you have lobbying, once the political party have to spend their own money, I don't think it works. I think it's just going to be corruption. Do, what do you think?
Yeah, our election cycles are too long. So, I think in the UK they said it's just a few weeks. That's it. So they really don't do any advertising, in between. It's just kind of a few weeks. Whereas ours kind of starts almost 2 years out for the general election, and it's just, it just seems like you're in a constant election cycle, one way or the other. But yeah, I understand what you were saying too about the corruption, because someone told me once that, the two big things for getting elected, especially in general elections, is name recognition and amount of money raised. And like in Trump's case, obviously he had name recognition from his life before, so he kind of had that. But so did Hillary Clinton. Everyone knew who she was, name recognition. But it does seem a little, our media also, it's hard to tell if they're playing it straight. I mean, I don't think they are, but some of the reasons aren't just because, they hate Trump. Some of it is just because what Toby said, it's corporate driven. And so the corporations decide who they don't want and who they want. And so, for example, Kennedy, I'm not probably wouldn't vote for him in the general election personally, but he's an interesting guy. and he's way more with it in my mind than Joe Biden. If you had a debate, that's one of the reasons I don't think they'll, he's not going to debate him on stage, is because, so right now the media can just portray him over and over again as, oh, he's crazy, oh, he's a nut job, but you never get to hear from the man. But he's kind of running a guerrilla campaign where he's just doing podcasts and things like that, like DPA. Like he's hitting all the like alternative media every day. I see him, like he's doing this podcast, Joe Rogan, and all these other things. And so we're in kind of an exciting time where the big corporate media is less and less. It doesn't really mean as much anymore. So. But I think it's too much money spent on our elections.
Yeah. Even here too, at least something similar we find here. So, for instance, like to buy the presidential ticket here for parties, like the previous election, they had to spend 100 million for 100 million for the tickets. For that's not even talking about how much the candidate that win will spend on the campaign and the rest. So when someone has already spent 100 million, how much is the salary of the president? I think officially is about $1 million or less than $1 million naira per month. So how is he going to generate this 100 million that he has spent already just for the party ticket? And so that's the same thing you see it at the governorship level. So most of them, when they come in, the first thing they come in to do is how to recover their what they've spent on the election process. So at the end of the day, now we see no development or nothing. Most of the embezzlement. That's why we see embezzlement and all these things tarnishing the country. So the same thing with Senate and every other. So that's what corruption is. But here we don't really have the system of America where corporations lobby. So here, basically, it is more, will I say, profitable or to be a politician than to even be the owner of a company or owner of a big company or whatever. Because even some people look at it as if you have a company, you invest from that your company into politics. So politics here has become more of a business. So you take money from your company to invest into politics because when you just manage to become a senator, that your company is not even of relevance again. What you'll be getting from the Senate, what you'll be getting from there is far above anything you are getting from the company. So really, most times is more or less in fact the corporations don't even have enough money as the political class. So I think that's.
Is democracy really important? Like sometimes I'm also thinking, like we used to be ruled by monarch, right? By warlords or emperors, and sometimes things work perfectly fine, even with that system. And even when you look at like the Mongols didn't really also impose any kind of centralized control. Like they conquered huge swaths of Asia to Europe, and basically they just let every group of people just run their own self. Basically, they just want you to say, okay, I'm part of the Mongolian Empire, the Mongol Empire now, and that's it. And they just run off to conquer another town, and you just need to contribute soldiers, and that's it. They just left you alone. But if you resist, they kill you all, and that's it. But then everything, and the Mongol Empire works. Everything just runs, and like the United States is supposed to be like that. Every states just run themselves. Everything will be fine. When somehow, we need direct democracy, for the presidents and everything. Upgrade.
Yeah, to come to this point, I think there must be a mixture, right? So you cannot just have total local rules, right? Running the entire country, right? You need to have a base of rules for everyone, and then afterwards, like in the Swiss system, like Duke said pretty well, we have cantons, and we call them Kantongeistli, like ghosts of the cantons who have their own will and want to do their own way, but still have rules to follow from the government, who are the base rule for everybody. And then afterwards, you play with the rules, right? You say, okay, I want to do this. I want to have less taxes so I can make people come to my state. So it increases the revenue of the state. They can spend it on infrastructure, on schools, hospitals, on public transportation, and so on. So after, it's like a circle, right? It's feeding itself, right? This is like a snake, right? It's feeding itself. It's eating his tail, and it has a mouth, but it needs a good balance, I think. And in the Swiss system, we said no at all to the centralized system, right? We don't want to be ruled by one big, huge thing who is not where we can't say what we want or bring a counter argument to it, because it's pretty easy to just be the big guy in the room and just say that's how it is, right? Like the Mongols, right? And if you don't do what I say, then guess what? You're gonna get killed, right? That's not a big choice, right? That's about democracy, is about choice, about freedom of what you believe in. You can represent it and debate it, and then the best idea wins. And not always, but if we are not able to make mistakes, how are we going to learn, right? That's a human process. That's my understanding, right? We need to learn from the mistakes we do, and if we do good things, then continuing this road, it's the best path, right? But that needs to be decided by the people, not by big guy or like in Brussels. And about the lobbying, I think in European Union it's not illegal to lobby. It's also not illegal to lobby in Switzerland. But I think the most important part, lobbying, I would say, is okay, but it must be clear, structured, right? It must have rules. And there's no rules. There's just everybody is doing what they want behind the doors and giving money to this guy or this guy, and they give them favors for it. That's the big problem, I think, in the entire world, right?
In Singapore, there's lobbying, but the lobbying doesn't work in the monetary sense, like to a specific representative. The lobbying is directly to the government, like through the union systems, or through dialogues with government, like corporation to government dialogues. They will lobby for the government to do more for certain things, but it's not a monetary thing. It's not a corruption thing. They don't stuff money into the pockets. There's no such thing because it's illegal. Like lately in Singapore, we have this case where our transport minister has been arrested for corruption. He was like, no, but it was not revealed what actually happened, but it was something to do with the F1 organizer in Singapore. So the Formula One, the Singapore Grand Prix organizer. I'm not sure what is the situation, what's the reasons for that. So it is illegal. So as long as no money is involved or no favors are involved, like no special discounts, no special gift, like anything of things of value given is considered corruption. It's very explicit in Singapore's law. So that's a different thing. I'm not sure. I know European Union is always very. It started off as an economic thing. It's an economic union. So that's why I think maybe that's why the corporations are a lot more powerful in the EU than I would say United States.
Wyatt, in Taiwan also has like a sort of direct democracy. You're more near there. How is it working there? I have
I'm not so sure about Taiwan, man.
Okay.
Taiwanese politics is very dramatic. Like they always sometimes they'll fight in the parliament, that kind of thing. Then we will joke about it. Then we will start to argue, in Singapore. Do you really want that kind of democracy in Singapore? Where they fight in the parliament. Then we will this is the argument for voting for the ruling party. No, we don't want the oppositions because these are the gutter politics, we call it. Yeah.
Okay. So should we do closing statements then to wrap up? And we can always do a second.
Immanuel want to say something?
Okay.
Just want to quickly say something about direct democracy. Also, another thing that just as what was said before, that it can easily be manipulated, and then this manipulation is even greater. It's a greater risk in areas like our region where we have a lot of people with low education. where there are some people high illiteracy level here. So like here, people can stand up based on religious grounds and then push all the people to go and vote on something. Like even where they vote in, for instance, there are some regions here where once you are a certain religion, you can campaign and say vote for me because I'm this certain religion and my opposition is a different religion. And you see a lot of the masses who are less educated go and vote for that candidate based on that, not asking what policies do you have to implement. So I still think in like this region, what I would think, even when if there's to be direct democracy, there should be at least a standard of literacy level that each person voting must have attained, that you say, okay, he has the capacity or whatever or knowledge to be able to vote on this certain for each level of voting. They should have certain standards, because even there was a time my dad told me that during the independence they came up with something similar to that. When that's before independence, now when they were trying to choose a form of government, for that, okay, for each, let's say this parliament level, everyone can vote. For a certain level of government, only those with probably a degree holders can vote. A certain level of government, only those with either your primary school leaving certificate can vote. So in that way, it will control this manipulation of the voting. And then also regions that see them, that people will be more interested in investing into education to make their people more literate, to be able to vote for important matters at higher levels. So unlike now, where we have a region where we have almost 70% illiteracy or 80% illiteracy level, and then we have another region with about 70% literate level, but the people at the other region have more population and they control most of the things at the national level, most of the posts at the national level. So that's just what I want to say.
Well, I was going to just say that there's that old maxim that power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And this is, to me, the great danger of centralized power. We see characters like George Soros openly discussing himself as some kind of god, and that's never good for the rest of us. We have these European leaders talking about going to war in Central Africa, in order to ironically protect democracy in the region. We see the same thing in Ukraine, where Zelensky is a dictator now. He has destroyed any democratic process, but we're still making war for democracy there. These wars are largely due to a real imbalance of power. We have power brokers who are playing out their personal fantasies on the world stage, and that has been the story of history, and that's the corruption of power. So to me, this is why a system of direct democracy that gives the people some voice. Now, I don't mean extreme direct democracy. I'm talking about a system of checks and balances where direct democracy is one part of it. Because if the process of direct democracy can stop extreme concentrations of power, then it seems to me that it stops extreme corruption, because corruption goes with power. And where you have absolute power, you have absolute corruption. I think that is an axiom of history. No, I could be wrong there, but that's my position on that. And that's why I'm very much in favor of the Swiss system. I lived in Switzerland for a long time. I was very, very impressed with that system. And I think that the Western world, especially the Anglo world, is very arrogant about its own system, and it feels it can't learn anything. And it's short-sighted. And so, yeah, that's my final position on that. But maybe you guys can sum up your positions as well on democracy, and we'll wrap it up. We can always do a second part, if we get more than 30 viewers. But listen, thanks guys for turning up. It was a really good discussion. I'm really glad to have you all here. I've been wanting to do this panel for a long time, so thank you.
So I will do my closing. So basically, I feel that what the Swiss have and maybe California have regarding the referendums, like citizen initiated thing, is something that all democracies should have in some ways, and the ability to recall, like to pull down a leader, if I think it's quite important, because this is something that I have been thinking about in Singapore for a long time. Because the problem we have is that we are a small country, essentially. Then we have one very powerful party, but we do not have an effective opposition party. Our opposition parties are all either overthinking it or they're just not good enough. So I was thinking, if there's an alternative system, there's a need for the ability to to get some kind of referendum going to change certain things, and then like what Switzerland have, 100,000 people agreeing that we need to rethink about these certain things, and then to have the government provide an alternative. I think that's a good way, but I know in Singapore we are against this, at least the ruling party is against this, because that defeats the whole purpose of the parliament, because the MP is supposed to bring this issue up without even need of any referendums. But the problem is, from what I witnessed, is that none of the MP, be it the ruling party or the oppositions, ever really asked me about what I think. Like, they will go on and then cosplay themselves as a politician to think that about, as if this is a very important issue, and then end up like they actually can't even solve small issues. So one of the scandals in Singapore is that the opposition, they have one of the MP literally lying in parliament, like lie. She just made things up. And she actually admitted to the party leader, the opposition party leader, who is also the leader of the opposition, that she lied. But this party was busy writing the motion or whatever, the argument for the next day's parliament proceeding, for their own massive argument or whatever shit. And they kind of just brush this aside and kind of forget about it entirely. And it's like, to me, it's like nobody really asked this opposition party to give so much attention into that specific bill. But you see, this thing that is the person who lied is a much bigger issue that they need to address immediately, call a press conference or whatnot, But so to me, it's like the opposition is not even voicing my voice, and they are not focusing on the right things. Sanctioning of Russia, no one asked a single question about why. How can that be? No, the opposition didn't say, no, we shouldn't do that. BRICS is coming up, big thing. No one talks about BRICS in the parliament. So what kind of representative do I have? I have no freaking idea. I have never seen my MP, he never come and talk to me before. I only meet him once for a award for my child, and that's it. That is. So that's why I find that, this direct democracy, this referendum thing is very attractive. I have been thinking about it. It's just that, how do you implement it? How do you get it to, be transparent, and people can really know that it's actually running? Because I think in Switzerland it's very honorable. There's too many political parties. It's very hard to manipulate stuff. But in Singapore, it's like we have one ruling party. They could have just hide the whole thing and nobody will ever know. So that's just the kind of things that I'm thinking about. Yeah, so that's my closing. Immanuel?
Okay. All right, so I would just reiterate on what I said before, that direct democracy is good, but we should also, in places where, in order not to allow it to also show its own ugly side, we need to have standards for those who can engage in it. So that would just be my own closing. And it's a good idea to be implemented, but it should have standards. I think, is it Plato, or was it Plato that had that argument? I can't remember, in the earlier Greek democracy. So I think that's my closing. It's nice talking to you guys.
Yeah, thank you, Immanuel.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, yeah, great discussion, guys. And I try and remember that, when people say we're fighting for democracy, or they associate democracy with war, that's just it's just political rhetoric. It has nothing to do with anything we're doing. Anything we do in Africa, anything we do in Ukraine, it really has. We're not defending democracy. And I do like I said, the idea of referendums are good. That's a good point. And I also like hearing all the different ways people can have their own democracy. And I'm open to people who don't want to have democracy either. That's one of the reasons I like the multipolarity idea. Is if Saudi Arabia feels like their system is working for them, I'm okay with Saudi Arabia being Saudi Arabia. I'm okay with China being China, because one of the problems my country has is it's almost a fetish, this democracy, America being the leader of democracy, and we're going to run around the world and give everyone democracy. George Bush, that was one of the big things for the Middle East, was he said, I want to bring democracy. And people got excited during the Arab Spring because they thought, well, this might be great. But it tore a lot of that stuff tore up North Africa and the Middle East, where, just terrible things happened, but we didn't care because it was like democracy might flourish. So democracy isn't for everyone. For the people that get it to work for themselves, that's great. And hope to talk to you guys again.
Yeah, definitely agree with you. We shouldn't force other people to choose a system which was going on in Europe or in most European countries for hundreds of years of hardship, right? It wasn't always a nice flow to get democracy. We had to suffer a lot most of the time to get it. So the system is not bad. I know many people say, yes, we have problems with democracy and it's not implemented right and so on, but we should also cherish it, right? We should say, hey, we are freer than in some other countries. We can voice our opinion without getting thrown to jail or something like that. But like I said, it doesn't mean that we need to say, oh, this country needs to take democracy because then it will become like us. No, it's not working like that. It's so many different places, religion, way of thinking, that we just should let the results talk. And then people will eventually say, maybe it's not so a bad idea, democracy. Look at how they do, right? Referendum are good. Look, we can do maybe differently than we did before and try it out, and let's see if it works. And if it doesn't work, then maybe implement it in their way, how they like it, or how it's suited to their population. So basically it's a on never ending topic, right? Democracy.
No, I think we're done. Thank you very much, guys, for turning up. It was a very interesting discussion, and yeah, maybe we'll do another one day, and we can talk about this. I think it's very interesting what Immanuel said. I would like on the next one maybe to talk more about like what qualifications should a person have to vote. I think this is a really interesting idea because historically it hasn't always been universal emancipation. There were property rights. There's a widespread idea these days that you should be married with children in order to have a vote, and one vote per household, which is fascinating. I think Immanuel makes a very good point that, you have to be careful. You have to be careful for mob rule. There have to be checks and balances to stop democracy creating a tyranny. And I think it's a very good point. And worth another discussion at a later point. But listen, thanks for turning up, and yeah, great talk.
Thank you, everyone. That's it for this panel, and I'll see you guys in the next panel. See you in the next one.